I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Gadigal people in Sydney. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. Underlying inflation has returned to the Reserve Bank's target band for the first time since 2021, dropping to 2.9% in March. Headline inflation remains steady at 2.4%. Are we still on track for interest rate cuts despite trade shocks? I'll ask the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says he's sure he'll receive a call from US President Donald Trump if re-elected. President Donald Trump says he is aware of Australia's attempts to discuss trade and will talk to the Prime Minister. Could a deal on tariffs be done after the election, no matter who is elected? I'll ask Coalition campaign spokesman James Paterson in just a moment. And the Prime Minister has dismissed the Coalition's suggestion that they would legislate a voice to Parliament in a second term. Foreign Minister Penny Wong walked back comments she made that Peter Dutton says demonstrates an intention to bring the voice proposal back. Why is this issue flaring up in the final week? I'll ask my political panel a little later. Let's begin today with the Prime Minister's customary National Press Club address. In his speech, he summed up Labor's case for government as one of certainty and stability. He also characterised the opposition's last 3 years, claiming they offered no solutions and blocked cost of living help.
The Coalition have spent 3 years trying to make life harder for Australians because they thought it would make politics easier for them, talking Australia down to try to build themselves up. The Liberals have not changed and they have not learned.
Let's bring in the Coalition's campaign spokesman, James Paterson, who joins us from a pre-polling booth in the Sydney electorate of Reid. James, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the Prime Minister said in his National Press Club address, the Liberals have not learned, they have not changed. Have you changed from what he describes as the dysfunction of 3 years ago?
Well, I think very clearly we have. We've had incredible stability, loyalty, collegiality. And we've launched a completely fresh platform and new policies to take to the Australian people, including real cost of living relief straight away, $14 off your fuel tank every time you fill up to $1,200 off your tax next year, and of course an ambitious plan to transition Australia to an emissions-free, nuclear-powered nation.
Okay, so your message is we're not the same Liberal Party that you were 3 years ago.
Well, very clearly we're not. We have a new leader, we have a new front bench, we have new policies, we have a new agenda, and our agenda is about getting our country back on track because it has got so off track after the last 3 years under Anthony Albanese. He promised us, all Australians, that they would be better off when he became Prime Minister. No Australian can say they're better off now than they were 3 years ago. He even promised that people would have cheaper mortgages, Patricia. I've yet to meet any Australian who's got a cheaper mortgage today than they had 3 years ago, and the Prime Minister has failed to deliver on that agenda.
Anthony Albanese says Australia needs stability at a time of global uncertainty. Now, that's a message that resonated, as we know, in Canada. Do you accept that change now might seem risky for many Australians?
Well, the change that I think a lot of Australians are contemplating and worried about is a change to a re-elected Albanese government, but this time in minority, having to cobble together some kind of coalition arrangement with the Teals and the Greens. That would be change, that would risk stability, that would be very uncertain in a dangerous world. What we're offering the Australian people is a strong coalition government led by Peter Dutton that can govern in its own right, that would govern in our own right if we're successful on Saturday, that will offer people strong leadership in dangerous and difficult times.
Just on some other issues about, your electoral chances, do you believe One Nation preferences could make the final result tighter than the published polling is showing, that it might actually help you in key seats?
Well, I've certainly seen that speculation, Patricia, but the honest answer to that question is no one knows, and we won't know until election night, and we're not asking people to vote for any other party other than the Liberal and National parties at this election. We're looking for primary votes, not preferences, and we hope to get enough of those to win enough seats around the country so that we can govern in our own right.
Okay, but you do have this preference deal with One Nation. You wouldn't have done it unless you thought that it could get you across the line in certain seats, right?
We have done no preference deal with One Nation. Months ago, Pauline Hanson publicly said that they'll be putting the Greens last, the Teals second last and Labor third last. That was a decision that they made independent of any negotiations or discussions with the Liberal Party, and their preferences are a matter for them, and they've decided to allocate them in that way, and our preferences are a matter for us. Liberal preferences really won't be distributed in almost any seat in the country. They certainly won't be distributed to any One Nation candidate, because there's no One Nation candidate who's in contention for winning any lower house seat. They'll be eliminated long before any Liberal candidate would be.
OK, but you have preferenced them number 2 in places, haven't you?
Yes, we have preference in number 2 in some seats, and that's interesting, but you have to nominate candidates on a ballot paper. In none of those seats will the Liberal Party preferences be distributed to anyone, let alone One Nation, who will get a smaller primary vote than us, and therefore their candidates will be eliminated before us.
OK, let me put this to you. I mean, Pauline Hanson turned up in Parliament, as you know, in a burqa. She has said many inflammatory things about the Islamic community. You'd have to say some of those actions are pretty Islamophobic. You've criticised Labor for what you say is a preference deal in relation to the Greens for being anti-Semitic. Why don't the rules apply for you? Like, why is number 2 OK for a party that has done these inflammatory things, but Labor should be scrutinised? Because to me, there are similarities.
Sure. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but there's a key difference there, which is that the Greens political party are in contention to win some seats. They will finish first or second in primary votes in some seats, and Labor has preferenced them in those seats. So Labor preferences can go to electing Greens members around the country in a way that Liberal preferences will never go to electing a One Nation member.
Well, they will in the Senate. You might end up with quite a few One Nation senators.
Patricia, let me tell you, we have preferenced the Labor Party in the Senate in some states and territories because you have to nominate 6 parties for preferences. I assure you we are not encouraging people to vote Labor. They are our principal political opponents. We do not want them to be elected to the Senate, but you have to nominate parties in the Senate to receive preferences. What we're asking people to do is vote one Liberal and National, not for any other party.
But do you understand what I'm saying, don't you? That in terms of values, it sends a message that you think maybe some of that stuff's OK? Can you see that it looks like that?
No, I don't accept that, Patricia. I understand that might be your view, but I don't agree with it. We're not endorsing any other party in this contest. We are.
Well, that's what Labor says when I press them. That's what they say. They say it's about us. Like, yes. It's the same argument.
It's a different argument, though, because Labor preferences can actually elect Greens members around the country in lower house seats. Our preferences will not go to elect any One Nation candidate anywhere in a lower house around Australia.
You're in the seat of Reid. It's a seat currently held by Labor's Sally Situ on a margin, I think it's about 5.2%. If you win a seat like that, could that herald an unexpected path to the Lodge for Peter Dutton?
Well, Grange Chung, our candidate for Reid, standing just over my shoulder, is an absolutely outstanding candidate who's given great service to this country already in uniform as a private citizen and is now putting his hand up to represent the people of Reid. We're very proud to have a candidate of his calibre in this seat, and I do think he has a good shot at this seat. He's been working incredibly hard and he's got an amazing group of volunteers behind me here. And so I think there is a real chance that we'll be able to win seats like this. And certainly, if we do win seats like this, that will mean we're in a very good position to form our own government.
Where do you stand on these election text message spams? I've got another one from the Trumpet of Patriots again today. I press the block and report button, which you can, and they come back. Do you have a view on whether these things should be banned?
I get them too, Patricia, and I don't like them either, and understand why a lot of Australians find it intrusive and unwelcome. As you know, we have an implied freedom of political communication in Australia. The High Court has upheld that many times, and that does mean that political parties have extraordinary latitude to communicate with voters during an election campaign, even in an annoying way, whether it's text messages or emails or ads. And so I think it would be constitutionally very difficult to restrict that. And we'd have to think very carefully as a country through whether or not we did want to restrict free political communication in an election campaign, as annoying as it can be sometimes. Yeah,
well, yeah, it is complex, I agree. Just on inflation figures, this is the target band now that we have entered, that the RBA sets. That's definitely good news, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately for Australians, it's come too little too late. I mean, their living standards are down 8% on this Prime Minister's watch. That's the highest in the developed world and the worst fall in living standards in Australia's history. So while there might be a slight moderation in inflation figures recently, it doesn't undo the pain that's happened over the last years. It doesn't reverse the 30% increase in grocery prices or the 32% increase in electricity prices or the 34% increase in gas prices. And it is going to take years for Australians to recover the living standards that they've lost under this government.
So the last couple of days are upon us. Just finally, what does that look like for your campaign? Is that about hitting as many teal seats for the opposition leader? What is the strategy?
Well, Peter's crisscrossing the country trying to visit as many target seats as possible, including seats that we're trying to win from the Labor Party, seats that we're trying to win from the Greens and seats that we're going to try to win from the Teals, including in Victoria, in Melbourne today. It's a sprint to the finish because we've got to get our message out to the Australian people about $14 off every tank of petrol or diesel, about $1,200 off your tax next year, about our plan to drive more gas into the East Coast system to drive electricity prices down and gas prices down, and to deliver the strong economy that Australians need and deserve.
Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
To hear from the government and also to talk about those inflation figures released today, let's bring in the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. Treasurer, welcome.
Thanks very much, Patricia.
Treasurer, the inflation figures, of course, have been released. It is within the target band now for the RBA. Do you expect that to be a linear path now in terms of reducing inflation, or is it still going to be bumpy?
Well, it's a powerful demonstration of the progress that Australians have made together on inflation. We've seen inflation go from 6.1% and rising sharply when we came to office, and now it's 2.4%, and underlying inflation is also now in the Reserve Bank's target band as well. What we've seen around the world is it doesn't come down in a perfectly straight line, but what we've seen in Australia is a very, very substantial moderation in inflation. And what makes us different here in Australia compared with the rest of the world is we've got inflation down at the same time. We've kept unemployment low. We've got real wages up. We've got growth rebounding solidly in our economy. We've got the debt down. And interest rates have started to come down as well. And so that's good progress that we've made together on Labor's watch. But we know that there's more work to do because people are still under pressure and the global environment is so uncertain. And that's why our economic plan, which is costed and coherent and credible, is all about lower taxes, higher wages, immediate and ongoing help with the cost of living, building more homes as part of building Australia's future.
Do you think you said today that the market has a very firm view that there are more interest rate cuts on the way, and you don't see anything in today's numbers that would substantially alter their expectations? So that's pretty clear. You expect rate cuts then?
Well, I made it clear when I said that, and I make it clear again on your program, Patricia, as I have before, that I don't make predictions about decisions taken independently by the Reserve Bank. I was asked earlier today about our market expectations of rate cuts, and there is now an entrenched expectation amongst economists and amongst the market that there'll be somewhere between 4 and 5 interest rate cuts this year at the same time as the economy continues to grow. If that eventuates, then that would obviously deliver quite a substantial benefit to Australians with a mortgage. That's what economists and the market is expecting. And that's a reflection really of two things. The global uncertainty is playing a role there, but also we have made really very, very substantial, very encouraging progress together in this fight against inflation, and that's what today's numbers showed.
So you're saying stick with us and you'll get your interest rate cuts?
I'm saying we've made progress on our watch. You know, we've got that inflation down, we've got the real wages up, low unemployment, growth rebounding, interest rates have started to come down. We've been repairing the budget, getting the Liberal debt down. But we say, we are up front with Australians and say that we know that there's more work to do. We know that people are still under pressure. The global environment's very uncertain. And so our message as we get closer and closer to Saturday's election is we've made progress together in uncertain times. We need the responsibility and the stability which can only come from a majority Labor government. And the contrast here is now very clear. Higher inflation under our predecessors, higher taxes, lower wages under Peter Dutton and the Coalition. And also, they haven't come clean on their secret cuts to pay for their nuclear reactors, and that's a very risky proposition for Australians who would be worse off if Peter Dutton wins on Saturday.
You've talked about this massive $600 billion figure in terms of how much that plan would cost. I think most experts believe that is an exaggeration. That's not to say it wouldn't be expensive. It clearly would be, right? But why use that enormous figure rather than being, more frank with the Australian public that it would clearly cost a lot, but it's an enormous figure, obviously, to create a sense of fear, isn't it?
No, it's because nuclear reactors are enormously expensive. You think about the one that they're building in the UK right now, $87 billion in a country that's got a lot of experience building nuclear reactors, and the coalition want to build 7 of them. And so that $600 billion number is very credible. This is the most expensive form of new energy. It takes decades to build. It pushes energy prices up. Private investors don't want to go anywhere near it. So I say this, Patricia, I mean, the coalition has to release their costings in the next couple of days. Katie Gallagher and I released ours on Monday. The coalition are leaving it to the very end. And David Littleproud has said that they'll begin building these reactors the day after they are elected to government. So we need to see that enormous cost of these nuclear reactors reflected in the coalition's costings. Otherwise, they won't be worth the paper they're written on.
This costings that you mention, is it really fair to carry on about the costings coming too late when, in fact, Labor also released your costings on Thursday of the last campaign? It's pretty standard. Of course, journalists like me wish it would come earlier, but you did it too.
Well, a couple of things about that. We released ours on Monday of this week, which is earlier than the coalition. I think that gives us the ability...
Well, this time round, but when you were at the opposition, it was different.
Well, I think that gives us some credibility when we call for the coalition's costings. But even if you accept the foundation of your question, Patricia, the difference this time around is the coalition have not come clean on their secret costs or their savage cuts, quite unusually even for an opposition. They haven't been telling people how much their policies cost. They haven't got their costings right when it comes to petrol or mortgages or their long lunches policy, which they don't talk about anymore. It's very rare for them to even say how much their policies cost. And so we call on the coalition to come clean on their secret costs and their savage cuts to pay for these nuclear reactors. Now, we know that the last time that Peter Dutton was in government, when he was the health minister, when he needed to find extra money, he came after Medicare and he came after hospitals funding as well. And people can expect him to do that again. He has said before that the best predictor of future performance is past performance. When he was a minister, he came after Medicare and he cut hospitals funding. But he's since said he doesn't want to do that, right? So he makes it quite clear. In fact, he's matched most of your, as I can see, all your health spending. They said that before the 2013 election as well, Patricia. And in the 2014 budget, they pulled $80 billion out of health and education, and Peter Dutton, as voted Australia's worst ever health minister, tried to impose a GP tax and undermine the universality of Medicare. And so we know when Peter Dutton is looking for money, that's where he goes, Medicare and hospitals funding. He can't actually find the $600 billion he needs to pay for his nuclear reactors without coming after Medicare and health again, just like he did when he was the health minister.
You've talked about nuclear and, the sort of commercial viability before. Westpac has said it's open to lending for nuclear power if that became policy under a coalition government. Does it show that actually, if it becomes policy, the kind of settings around the behaviour of banks and others would change?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the investor community, primarily our Australian investor community, but also globally as well, and people don't want to go near this. Behind closed doors, they think it's a bit of a joke, frankly, because we've got a different combination of advantages here in Australia. For us, nuclear is the most expensive form of new energy. It takes too long and it pushes up electricity prices, and so people don't want to go near that. It's really just this nuclear insanity that we hear from Peter Dutton. So you don't think Westpac
would be open to it?
Well, they've said they'd be open to lend to it, but I haven't heard anyone say that they're open to invest in it. No credible private sector organisation or investor that I've spoken to wants to invest in nuclear energy, and that's because that would be turning Australia's back on this remarkable combination of advantages we have in terms of our resource base, our industrial base, our meteorology, all of these things which lead us to recognising that the cheapest form of new energy, the cleanest and cheapest, is renewable energy and more reliable as well. And so that's where the investor community is at, and that's where Labor's at.
Even if you are to be successful at the election on the weekend, it's only 3 sleeps away. Not that you and I are counting. We are counting.
Not that
all
we're
the time.
sleeping either, PK, to be honest.
Why sleep? Why sleep? You sleep when you're dead, as I like to say. So we've got a lot of work to do. You to win an election, clearly, and me just to ask questions of people trying to win elections. So I want to know what it looks like on the other side if you are successful, because I've spoken to voters, as you know, I've gone to marginal seats. You won't have a lot of time to prove yourself to the Australian public. They want delivery. What does activity look like for you as a treasurer in your first couple of weeks back? Is it kind of putting, no, not to be rude, but your feet up and going, whoa, that election was intense? Or what does delivery look like? Because Australians are clearly frustrated that they want activity, they want action on their cost of living.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, I don't take the outcome on Saturday for granted. I think it's going to be extraordinarily close. It wouldn't shock me if we didn't know on the night the outcome of the election, because I think it's that tight. And so we're not taking any vote for granted. We're not taking any outcome for granted. We think it's going to be very close. The Prime Minister left here after his National Press Club speech today. He's going to visit 6 states in the course of the next couple of days, and that shows that we're going to work hard for every vote. So I don't want to preempt the outcome or take any outcome for granted. But when it comes to delivery, you know, we are already rolling out tax cuts, we're rolling out energy bill rebates, cheaper medicine, fee-free TAFE. And if we win the election, there'll be more in the way of tax cuts, there'll be a cut to student debt. There are a whole range of cost of living measures which are substantial and meaningful, but also responsible. We've made room for them in the budget. And that's because we do genuinely understand people are still under pressure despite this remarkable progress we've made together on inflation. We know that people are still under pressure. The global environment is uncertain. And that's why we have been delivering, we have been making progress, but there's more work to do.
Yes, there is obviously a lot of work to do if you ask any voters. Final question, just be honest. There's not going to be a nuclear power plant in Peter Dutton's seat, is there?
Well, he was asked about this in the debate on Sunday night, and your counterpart Mark Riley said, would he be okay with a nuclear reactor in his own suburb? And he said, yeah, I would. And I think
he was asked, as you know, a question about whether he'd be comfortable living next to one as a point about whether he trusts its safety. It was an obvious question. He said, I would. Not that there's going to be. That's you've got to be straight with people, right?
I just quoted him accurately, Patricia, when he was asked would he be comfortable with a nuclear reactor in his suburb. He said, yeah, I would. And I think the people of Dixon need to know that the Labor candidate there, Ailey France, would not be comfortable with a nuclear reactor in their suburbs, in their local community. Their current local member, Peter Dutton, would be comfortable with a nuclear reactor in their suburb. And I think it's strange that people would think we couldn't point that out, given he said that on national TV in a televised debate with the Prime Minister.
Didn't say he was going to build one.
They are his words, that he would be comfortable with a nuclear reactor in the suburbs of Dixon. I want to assure and reassure the people of Dixon that Ailey France, your wonderful Labor candidate in that beautiful part of southeast Queensland, would not be comfortable with that. And I think that's an important factor in people making a big decision in Dixon, which will be a tight seat on Saturday.
All right. Treasurer, good luck, although I don't think you need a lot of luck in your seat of Logan generally, but, you know, we'll see. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
I appreciate it, Patricia. Thank you.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton today jumped on comments made by Foreign Minister Penny Wong on the Batuta Advocate podcast about the Indigenous voice to Parliament. Now, Wong told the podcast Anthony Albanese was not a pull-the-pin kind of guy, and that it would be looked back in a similar way to the campaign for same-sex marriage. She has since said in a statement that the voice was gone. Now, opposition leader Peter Dutton brought up these comments several times in his press conference today, claiming Labor would legislate a voice in the next term of Parliament.
It would be one of the first items of business for a Labor Greens government to introduce legislation to put in place the voice and treaty and truth-telling, etc., This is why the Prime Minister tied himself in knots in relation to this issue the other night in the debate. It's obvious that the Prime Minister shares the view of Penny Wong. He just is not as honest as Penny Wong. And Australians should know that if you vote for Anthony Albanese, he hasn't listened the first time around in relation to your decision on the Voice referendum. Send him a message at this election that no, we're not going to support the Voice legislated by Labor and the Greens and treaty and truth-telling.
Well, the Prime Minister was asked about Penny Wong's comments and whether the Voice was still off the table. He told Network 10 journalist Chloe Burris that she was verballing the Foreign Minister and that the government respected the outcome of the referendum.
We put it to the Australian people, which was the gracious request. I think that was something I said I would do, and we did. We also said we would respect the outcome, and we have. What we are now working towards is practical reconciliation. How do we close the gap? The truth is that every government, Labor and Conservative, has not done well enough. What we are doing is addressing those issues, still engaging through the coalition of peaks and through First Nations people, but we also respect democratic processes.
That's the Prime Minister speaking a little earlier. Well, welcome to country ceremonies, now the Voice today. All of these issues may have some influence on voters, particularly voters with passions either side of those very, very polarising debates. But if you ask any researcher or pollster, even anyone on either side of politics in this country, they'll tell you, well, it's the economy, stupid. Every single bit of research points to this being the biggest issue alongside housing for voters, which really is a cost of living issue. That's not to say that voters don't care about these issues or that don't have any impact, particularly at this time. But in the last week of the campaign, you'd think that the only messages to be nailing would be around the economy, given voters are saying they want to know what governments and alternative governments are going to do for their economic interests. Now, for the Prime Minister, he's seen what's happened in Canada and he wants that reflected here. I'm sure he wants even a better result and a majority. He today painted a picture of risk if people choose to turf out his government. He wants that to be on people's minds. For Peter Dutton, the task is to make Australians take that risk and to not see it as an overly big risk. His 15th visit to a service station to sell his cheaper petrol pitch was a good sign of that today, getting back on that economic message. But still, he's trying to raise some of these other issues to create a sense of doubt or to make people think that Labor would return to its days during the Voice campaign. There's only a few days left, and it's really everyone's running out of time to make that final economic message. Well, as we mentioned in our headlines a little earlier, Donald Trump made an allusion to further trade negotiations with Australia to reporters in Washington overnight. The US president indicated he would talk to the Prime Minister after the election.
Will you speak to the Prime Minister of Australia at all? Please. Mr. Trump.
You'll make the call.
The Australian Prime Minister is having an election this weekend. Will you speak to him about trade?
They are calling and I will be talking to him, yes.
Let's bring in the Nationals Senate leader, Bridget McKenzie, who joins me from Melbourne now. Lovely Melbourne. Hello, Bridget McKenzie.
Hey, good to be with you, PK.
We'll get to the US president in a moment, but on the issues that I was just raising there with our viewers, ultimately, it's the economy, isn't it? I mean, voters are overwhelmingly saying that it's cost of living that they want dealt with. Is there any usefulness in talking about things like The Voice or Welcome to Country ceremonies this week?
Well, PK, you're absolutely right. The number one issue for Australians is cost of living. They've suffered the greatest drop in their spending power in our nation's history, and prices aren't going down, no matter what the Treasurer just said on your program earlier. The reality is energy's gone through the roof, insurance has gone through the roof, rent, food, you name it, Australians are really struggling, and the Labor Party doesn't have an answer for that. In fact, they've been shown to not be good economic managers, and we've seen the rating agencies come out and express their concerns about the AAA credit rating and concerns about particularly federal Labor government spending increases and the pressure that's putting on the budget. So their economic credentials are making the situation worse, and we're seeing that out in, you know, outer suburban streets, regional capitals. I've been to nearly 39 different electorates over the campaign, and in each and every one, Australians are seriously struggling because of the Labor Party's failure to have a plan. But when you talk about the conjecture, shall you say, that Penny Wong raised, the fact was in 2023 we had a referendum on the voice proposal. Australians, to the tune of 60% of us, said that wasn't a proposal that we thought had merit. We did believe in reconciliation and a practical approach to overcome the disadvantage with Indigenous and Torres Strait Islanders, and particularly those in marginalised regional and remote communities. But that the voice wasn't going to help us, and in fact it divided us. Now, the fact that the Foreign Minister has gone on a mainstream media agency and said it's an inevitable proposal, I think is quite incredible in the last week of the campaign. And Australians have every right to be concerned that this is in the top drawer of the Prime Minister's legislation should he get the privilege to run this country again. So I think it's absolutely something we should be raising, but not taking away from the one concern that Australians have, which is on cost of living and Labor's failure to do anything about it.
She said there won't be, the voice is dead. So do you accept the voice is dead?
Well, I take the Foreign Minister at the word. We sit in the chamber together. We're both leaders of political parties.
It's her word that it's dead.
And if Penny Wong is saying, you know, that the voice is a proposal like same-sex marriage, that people will be surprised at a future date that we ever had a fight about it.
Well, it was more about
that
Indigenous rights being debated, right?
Well, I'm happy for your viewers to actually go to the clip of her interview and make up their own minds. I think Penny Wong made it very clear that the Labor Party, particularly the left wing of the Labor Party, of which the Prime Minister's a part of, sees the voice as an inevitable component of our future landscape.
Okay, but she says it's dead. Do you accept that she has said now that it's dead?
I'm going on her public comments that I saw earlier today, PK. So we know that cost of living is the number one issue for Australians. They've had to suffer 12 interest rate rises under the government. If you listen to the Treasurer and Prime Minister, you'd think the war against inflation is over. They're the only two in this country that think so. The IMF's come out concerned that we will see inflation on the rise in 2026, and Australians know that prices aren't going down and that they're still struggling, and Labor doesn't have a plan to address it. And that's why we have got immediate relief through our $1,200 tax off relief, the slashing of the fuel excise as soon as we come to government, and a raft of measures to get government spending under control so the rating agencies, whether it's Standard & Poor's, the IMF or the RBA, can have confidence that there is a team in charge of the Canberra budget that actually understands that rampant government spending is not the way to future prosperity.
Do you accept that inflation is now within the RBA's target band and that that's a good thing for our country?
I understand inflation takes a long time to wrestle into the box. And spouting off the figures today, we know that it is higher than market expectations. We know that the government spending profile hasn't improved, that they've got $100 billion off-budget measures, which credible economists are calling BS on. So on any measure, we've got debt and deficits as far as the eye can see. And if the rating agencies themselves, here domestically and internationally, are raising concerns with the level of government debt and the government of baked-in spending over the forwards and beyond, then what you're going to see is interest rates rise for Commonwealth debt, and that means we're going to have to pay more interest on our debt over coming years.
And was
that
to both
means,
sides of politics.
Sorry, but PK, people need to understand that means less roads, less money to spend on healthcare, less money to spend on education, and less money to spend on defence. The actual critical things a Commonwealth government should be doing.
But
so
the ratings agencies...
everyone goes ratings, schmatings.
No,
it's not
I don't think
case.
Ratings, schmatings at all, actually.
Well,
I think it's
if you
pretty
listen to
serious.
Jim Chalmers, essentially this guy is talking up a rosy picture. That is not what was handed down yesterday.
But there's
and
a
the
lot of debt.
expectation
Whoever
of
we elect on Saturday as a country, we're going to get a lot of debt either way. So the warning was about spending to both sides of politics.
PK,
Do you accept that?
Australians are going to the ballot box over coming days, and they need to be thinking about who is best positioned to be good economic managers. Now, we as a coalition have had to come in and clean up Labor's mess before. It takes a long time and it takes a disciplined approach. We've made it really clear as we've moved through this campaign things that we think are wasteful spending. We will be cancelling funding from the Commonwealth for Labor's $200 billion suburban rail loop. We're cancelling the Rewiring the Nation fund. We've made a range of announcements of where we can find saves in the federal budget to make sure we can put back much needed discipline. The Labor Party instead is spending like drunken sailors and putting us in a weaker position, as their own budget shows, handed down just recently. So this isn't Bridget McKenzie talking points. This is actually S&P, IMF, RBA, credible economists saying the inflation genie is far from slayed.
Well,
and that's what the IMF said.
Clearly not
2026.
slayed,
it's going to be outside
in the RBA's
of the target band
range today. That's today's news. Just on a couple of other things before I let you go. Tomorrow's your costings day. Will we get a clearer picture on the nuclear policy? Because there's been a lot of discussion about its cost, and the opposition's been very defensive about the figures Labor puts out. So do you need to be clearer about all of that?
Jim, another day, another Labor scare campaign. Honestly, the $600 billion price tag that Labor, serious and senior Labor ministers have been touting is a figure that was developed by their own lobbyists and donors. We know the CSIRO costed the capital costs of the nuclear plan at $120 billion. We've made it clear that our energy plan in its entirety, which includes nuclear, includes renewables, poles and wires and the gas, $331 billion. And that is 44% cheaper than Labor's. And that means when things cost less, you're going to be charged less. It's that simple. So we're very, very comfortable that we've got an energy plan that's going to not just drive down prices when compared to Labor over coming decades. It's going to secure jobs here on shore. And importantly, PK, for those who want to see action on climate change, we're going to join the rest of the world, the developed industrialised world, and have a net zero power option into next century. That's got to be good news. And if the Labor Party in the UK can support it, the Democrats in the US, right through Europe, the Greens in Finland, I don't know what's wrong with Albo.
All right, let me put this to you. You're taking One Nation preferences. They might be quite useful in some key seats. I remember back in the day, Nationals like Ron Boswell would be very much campaigning against One Nation and wanting One Nation to be last. What's happened?
Well, back when Bozzy was around, the Greens were not the political operation that they are now. They're anti-Semitic, they're anti-mining, they're anti-agriculture, they're our great nation and everything that makes us great. So we are very, very comfortable to be putting the Greens at the bottom of our preferences, along with the Labor Party. We want to make sure that regional Australia has a prosperous, sustainable and safe future.
Yeah.
And we know that the Greens and the Labor Party are the biggest risks to that. So we're very comfortable with our preference arrangements.
Okay,
Thanks,
all
PK.
right. But you say the Greens are anti-Semitic. They would contest that. They're not here, but I just want to put that on the record because that's what they do. But let me ask you this.
I think the proof's in the pudding.
Let me ask you this.
If you want to go survey everyone that's been marching in the streets here in Melbourne since October the 7th, I'm pretty sure they're not National Party voters.
They're not all Greens, but
they're not National Party voters.
They're probably not National Party voters, if that's the point. I think probably that's likely to be true. But the question is this: do you think One Nation is Islamophobic?
I don't know. That's a question you need to actually ask Pauline Hanson.
But how can you not know? I think she came into the Parliament wearing a burqa.
I was sitting in the aisle as she strode down. Pauline Hanson can answer for her policies. She can answer for her preferences. I'm very, very comfortable with our preferencing offering. We're focused on actually delivering an offering for rural and regional Australia that backs our mining, that backs our agriculture, that gets roads built, that delivers the Regional Australia Future Fund, a $20 billion fund that's going to future-proof it against Labor governments that cut funding to the regions. There's 9 million of us out there. We produce a lot of the wealth that people like Jim Chalmers take for granted and are happy to pocket. And we want to make sure we get some of it back.
When she did walk in with the burqa, did you think that was offensive?
I can't comment, I guess, PK, on what people choose to wear. But
if someone
we live in a free
into
country. I don't agree with what everybody chooses to wear.
If someone walked
if I'm
into
going
the Parliament
to disagree
dressed
with
to mock a Jewish person, you wouldn't think that's okay. I certainly wouldn't.
PK, people can wear what they like. We're in a free country. The last time I checked.
Well, it is free. It's a very free country. But you wouldn't be comfortable with a Jewish person being mocked, is my point.
Well, we've got Christian people supporting us as a party. We've got Muslims supporting us. We've got Sikhs supporting us, Hindus. We've got atheists supporting us, PK. So the National Party is a broad church. People know our offering. They're very clear on what we care about, what we hope to deliver if we get the great privilege to be in a coalition government come Sunday. And so I hope we've made that clear to them.
OK. We're out of time, Senator. Always great to speak to you. Speak to you on the other side of the election.
See ya.
There are just 3 days to go until Election Day, and despite the mountain of pre-poll votes already cast, there is still everything to play for. To help see where we're at, I checked in with one of our regular panels, Ryan Liddell, who's the head of communications for Bill Shorten in the 2019 election, and Jason Falinski, a former Liberal MP who was unseated by a Teal independent at the last election. Ryan, Jason, welcome to the program.
Hi, PK.
Thanks, PK.
Let's start with campaign costings. It is increasingly kind of like a bit of a pantomime in election campaigns. Labor's got theirs out, the coalition gets theirs out tomorrow. Ryan, to you, are voters concentrating on this, given really both campaigns have been quite high spending?
Oh, I think they are, and I think it does go to sort of credibility when it comes to economic management. The idea that you have your costings out before the other party. It's a small little win in that respect for the Labor Party. Being able to put the pressure on Angus Taylor and Jane Hume to sort of stand up and show how they're going to pay for things, given the line around the $600 billion that has to be cut from the budget to pay for the government. So the coalition's nuclear power plant plan has been so pertinent, so it has put the pressure on the coalition, and there is a drumbeat sort of heading into the final days. And if one of those last final days ahead of the election on Saturday, ahead of polling day, can be characterised by a costings potential bungle from the coalition, and that's obviously a positive for the government.
Well, Jason, tomorrow is the day that the Coalition will finally outline their costings. They claim the budget bottom line will be better under them, but they... You know, you'd have to agree that the Coalition hasn't exactly been small in its spending in this election, and they've matched so much of Labor's spending to start with.
PK, well, of course, you've hit your target perfectly. I always think governments are spending too much money, but that's just me. Yeah, look, I think this has been a high-spending election campaign. I think it's reflective of the fact that a lot of Australians are feeling cost of living pressures, and really governments all around the world are a bit stumped about what to do about that. So they're relying increasingly on direct subsidies. And Angus Taylor and Peter Dutton have also adopted that strategy, which means no one comes to the costings exercise without, with great purity, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Purity is certainly not the centrepiece of this campaign, I think it's fair to say. Today, the Prime Minister addressed the National Press Club. You know, he made his point that the opposition leader hadn't addressed it, which is also a way that he tries to, demonstrate that he's the one that's prepared to be more accountable, Ryan. Is that message, though, does it matter to people? Is it landing?
Oh, I think it's important because it really has shown up Peter Dutton this campaign, the idea that he hasn't exposed himself to those sorts of environments, you know, the regular sort of press conferences in Canberra with the press gallery where you're under sustained repeated questioning, the press club where you stand up and you cop some of the nasty questions from the journos sitting at that front table. So it does make you match fit, as we've seen with the Prime Minister this campaign. And you've certainly seen it lacking with Peter Dutton. And I guess it means that the lack of scrutiny means that policies have been coming out from the Coalition that have been half-baked, that haven't gone through the rigour that you'd hope with election policies like full PBO costings through the Parliamentary Budget Office, full research, things like, the work from home policy. You know, Blind Freddie could see that coming from a mile away, that was going to blow up in the Coalition faces, and the feedback that the leadership was getting from backbench MPs was that it was going to blow up, but still they sort of persevered. So that lack of scrutiny and that lack of accountability has really let the Coalition down this campaign, I think.
The opposition leader, Jason, didn't address the National Press Club. Do you think that's a mistake?
Look, it all depends really, PK, on where he's at, what the priorities are, frankly, what the research of both party or the Liberal Party is showing. And look, let's face it, addressing the National Press Club, while it is full of wonderful and generous people, and I reject Ryan's ideas view that they ask nasty questions. That's completely unfair, Ryan. But the fact is that it is still a bit of an insider's game, and maybe at this point he's calculated, with a week to go, he's better off looking like he's out there in the community, mixing it with voters and taking people's questions that way. And so tonight he's on another network with a People's Forum. So there'll be that contrasting style, I suspect. Look, we'll find out on Saturday night whether it worked or not. But that, I think, is probably the tactical calculations that both campaigns are making.
Now, the other issue that's come up throughout the week is essentially Indigenous affairs, and I'm sure lots of Indigenous people have thought this is rather odd. If I can, reflect some of the Indigenous people I've spoken to have said to me, kind of our issues have been ignored, but then they've come up in ways that I think many of them find unwelcome. Today, the opposition leader repeatedly brought up The Voice again, trying to say that Penny Wong had suggested that it was inevitable that it would be brought back. Now, this is because Penny Wong spoke in a podcast and made a comparison with marriage equality. Ryan, the Prime Minister was pressed on that as well. I mean, it clearly was a little unfortunate for Labor, wasn't it? Because clearly The Voice was a winner for Peter Dutton, and he's now been able to say this is Labor's plan to bring it back.
I think it's been a little bit strange this week, PK. You talk about, obviously Indigenous issues coming to the fore in the campaign at the strong behest of Peter Dutton. Obviously, the Anzac Day commemorations were interrupted on Friday. Peter Dutton, by some people sort of heckling and yelling, Peter Dutton said that was disrespectful on Friday. Then on Monday he said, that he didn't think the Welcome to Country ceremonies were appropriate. Now, the idea that he wants to talk about Welcome to Country ceremonies this week, he's talked about, the ABC as the hate media, the Guardian as the hate media, talking about issues that really aren't sort of front and centre for people who are making their mind up heading into the ballot box, this week and on Saturday. I found that really bewildering. I was talking to a candidate, one of our candidates in South Australia this week, and I asked her about the Welcome to Country stuff, and I said, how often does it come up? You've done a lot of direct voter contact, and she said to me, not once. Literally not one person has ever raised that with her in the year or so she's been campaigning for the seat. So I think that it really sort of goes to the fact that their campaign's not going particularly well. They're reverting to the base. Jason talked about various media that the opposition leader's been doing. He's done Sky After Dark twice this week. People who watch Sky After Dark probably don't necessarily need convincing to vote for coalition a lot of the time. I know it's a generalisation, but
maybe they do. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they do.
Look, at the start of the week, you and I were reading stories in the paper about this huge blitz the opposition leader was going to do through seats across the country, Mr Action Man, win votes left, right and centre. I haven't seen any of that. Sitting in the studio, Sky After Dark isn't out there sort of pressing the flesh with MPs, with candidates, trying to win those local votes. So I think we are sort of seeing a bit of a live stream of a campaign in disintegration, and I think on Saturday we'll see the results of that.
Yeah, Jason, I do wonder how some of these things play out in a seat like your former seat and other seats that have now been won by independents. There are some culture war kind of elements to some of these discussions. There certainly aren't cost of living issues. Do you think it could be damaging for the coalition in those parts of Australia?
PK, look, after the election, you and I should sit down for half an hour and I'll give you my views on
I cannot wait.
Where I think...
Is that the deal? Let's make it a deal.
That's a deal, absolutely. I think that the Liberal Party wins when it is talking about a larger society and a larger community, not sort of niche wedge issues, which I think Ryan was pointing to there. To be fair to Peter Dutton and to be fair to the Liberal Party campaign, it didn't raise Welcome to Country ceremonies. It didn't raise The Voice. That was pretty sloppy by Penny, and frankly, she knows she would be kicking herself for opening that door. But if there's anything that really annoys me in Australian politics, it's the politicisation of Indigenous affairs. I really think that this is one group of Australians who desperately need our attention, and we all need to leave our ideologies at the door and talk about practical solutions that are actually going to result in closing the gap. So it is incredibly unfortunate when these things get brought up in the middle of campaigns. In terms of has this been a good campaign for the Liberal Party or not, I think it's been a very difficult campaign, and that's been outside the control of the Liberal Party. And we just saw in Canada overnight that a leader, being Pierre Poilievre, who was leading at the end of February by 29 points, has ended up losing, and we all know the factors that largely drove that. And I think, while not as pronounced in Australia, there has been a part of that here in Australia as well, and maybe we could have been more agile. It's difficult to know what we could do really to counteract that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty honest answer, given we're only a couple of days away from the election, Jason. Given, your party affiliation, I appreciate you being honest, because I think people want straight talk about what's going on, and I think you're right about the Canadian. There are parallels with our politics. It's not entirely the same. We do not share a border. In fact, we quite like not sharing a border with anyone, don't we? Let's be honest. It's something most Australians will be nodding at for sure right now, going, yeah, it's pretty good. Nice oceans. Okay, so we've got a couple of days left. Ryan, I know you don't like the 2019 Labor loss trauma, but I have to take you there. Keep hearing it from Peter Dutton. I've heard it from the Prime Minister. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. This might be a bit like 2019. My inbox, that I hope I don't ever lose my phone, is full of both Liberal and Labor people saying to me, oh, I don't know, might have 2019 feeling. What do you think, Ryan?
That's a very open-ended question. I think both leaders should be, if they're worth their salt, running 100 miles an hour up until 6 o'clock on Saturday, May the 3rd. And I certainly know that's what the Prime Minister's prerogative is, and it's as per what I was saying previously, it's kind of a bit bewildering that the opposition leader hasn't been doing the same thing. I think the key is showing that that you're not going to give up. You're right to the end, all the way through. If I was the opposition leader, I think they missed a trick insofar as obviously there's international factors that influence, to Jason's point, but they really missed that trick before the campaign, which was really transitioning from that opposition to alternative government. Like, you've got the opportunity to do that just before the campaign. They failed to do that. They didn't do the work on the policies, and now they've been outdone on policy. They've been outdone on politics, and they've been outdone on the campaign. And I think the results are coming through in the polling that we're seeing coming through during the week.
Jason, final word for you about that kind of dynamic, about what's at stake and whether there might be a sort of suburban strategy that Peter Dutton was eyeing and it may be working?
Look, I think there's evidence to that. Look, every election's different, and this isn't like 2019, but there would be some data points that I think Labor campaigners would be worried about. One is that there's no real love for this government. It's not a government that most Australians think deserve a second term. They might choose it because of other factors, like they're looking for safety and certainty given what's happened since February. However, they might get to the polling booths on Saturday and essentially say, you know what, I can't see any difference between them. I don't think my life's any better off than it was 3 years ago. I don't see any cost in changing. So there is a lot of volatility in the electorate at the moment, and there are stories coming out left, right and centre. We don't know how they're resonating, what stories people are choosing to listen to, what stories they're ignoring, and what stories will land. And all of that is just making for a very, very volatile election. At the moment, you would put money on Labor, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Liberal Party does better than most people are expecting.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Well, it's been great to pick your brains. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you.
That's afternoon briefing for today. Stay with us here on the ABC News Channel.